Paul, while you're getting mic'd up, maybe Phil would have a question or two just to get started on the boiling the oceans question. And I think it's a kind of a special opportunity that we shouldn't pass up. I don't know, I can introduce basically, because Phil said this to me over the phone, that the energy efficiency of Bitcoin is often in the news. And go ahead, you can add to that.
Yeah, I need to go home soon, so I can't stay for your whole thing. But if you front load it with the anti-ocean boiling ideas, that would be nice.
Well, I wrote an essay called "Nothing is Cheaper Than Proof of Work," and so the long story short is I think you should actually. To be an apples-to-apples comparison, you should really look at all of the energy wasted in like ATMs and point-of-sale machines, and it actually, people have done this, and it's several orders of magnitude lower than is currently used. The another thing that is often not explained well in Bitcoin is that it's a fixed cost for a 2-week period, so it doesn't matter how many transactions you end up fitting in there. So even though a tremendous amount of energy is used, as the technology improves and more transactions can be fit, and theoretically an infinite number of transactions, not an infinite, but a very high number of transactions can be fit into each block, and there are many blocks in each 2-week period. The energy use per transaction can actually fall even more, many orders of magnitude. But yeah, the issue with these other systems is that so far no one has designed a system that has yet to regress to consuming resources in some form or another. But I wrote kind of a giant essay about that, which I'd be happy to email. I think you may find this talk, the first 10 minutes of this talk, more interesting though than the essay that you could read, but it's "Nothing is Cheaper Than Proof of Work," and if you just Google that phrase, you'll find it, because it's right at the top. Or at least it was last time I checked. So, I mean, I wish we had time to talk about so many things, but should we just get right into this thing here? Because, oh, yeah, where's my note?
Let's give Paul an applause here.
Okay. So I constantly refine this talk, and I've been messing with it for the first, yes, sure, no problem. The first few, we just met each other. Okay. Okay, thanks. So yeah, I made this presentation in January, and I've changed it around so many times, so you have to just bear with me as I keep refining it. But basically, okay, here we go. So I wrote a project about blockchain prediction markets, and I wrote a paper behind it and the code, but I don't have anywhere near enough time to talk about the whole thing, so I'm just going to talk about my favorite thing that motivated me to create the project in the first place. So here we go. So then this is part of the presentation I changed, so I have to read it. So in modern times, a vast portion of our wealth and the welfare of billions of lives depend crucially on the outcome of institutions that we call elections. So that's the first thing here, and then okay. Yes, and bad public policy can ruin just about everything. So unnecessary wars, poverty, miserable social lives as people obsess over conspiracy theories, right? Slower economic growth, meaning that lives in the future will be much worse than they otherwise would. And then since most people who will live in the future, assuming that this species doesn't go extinct, which is generous maybe, but most people will live in the future, and so we should care a little bit about them. Obviously, though, today we're talking percentage points of global GDP growth, and millions of people who are alive today. So that's just part that I haven't tried. Okay, yes. So now, during the Enlightenment, people came up with this basic kind of structure here, and political thinkers used what they had learned from the Roman Empire over years of tinkering and from Athenian democracy, and they came up with this thing here. And a lot of it is pretty cool and worth talking about, but the most important thing is that we have these secret ballots, and when their errors inevitably show up, we fire someone using the secret ballot, and we say, "Get this. I didn't like this, so it's time for you to get lost." And so a lot of things, basically all this stuff hinges on this thing here. Now, when it was designed, or what I mean by that is like in the 1800s when the U.S. Constitution was written, things were a little different, and it sort of worked, I think, a little bit better than it works today. But now it does require, we'll get to that in a second, but it does require the voter to do a lot of counterfactual thinking. So like, would this have been better under this other person versus, is what we have just the best that we can do, and maybe a new person will make it worse? And they have to do a lot of thinking, basically. And you also have to do some game theoretic reasoning, thanks to something called electability that I'm going to explain in tremendous detail that ruins elections to a tremendous degree. So the thing that I was mentioning before is that while it was sort of working, I think, much better in the 1800s, now it doesn't work as well, I think. And so some of the impacts here are that as society has progressed, there are more people living here, and that just means you have a smaller impact per vote. So if you have 3 people voting, it's virtually guaranteed that your vote will really count. But if you make a simple model, which I have done, and you just assume that you don't know other people are voting with a coin flip on whether or not they vote up or down or just abstain, then at around 8 other voters, your probability of affecting the outcome at all drops below 50%. And at 41 other voters, it drops basically to 0%. So, and in the United States, like 115 million people vote, so it's kind of a lost cause. But the other thing is this point about media ecology, which I'd love to make in more detail, but when I do, it just drags the presentation on. But everyone should read this book, Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. It's a really wonderful book. And in the past, 95% of Americans, this is a very American-centered part of the talk, I'm sorry about that, but when Thomas Jefferson aligned all this stuff, almost everyone was a literate farmer, and so they had a lot of free time to read, and you had, and over 95% of the population of the United States at that time were people who were literate and farmers, and almost all the media that was consumed was typography. It wasn't even handwriting, it was the printed word. So it had these qualities of being very abstract and even anonymous, because it would look the same no matter who wrote it. And you had like Thomas Paine and these other famously kind of anonymous pamphlets that were circulated. So again, I could talk about this point for a very, very long time, but the short version is that today we're bombarded with another interesting point, 2 more, is that people were very famous. People like Charles Dickens, who wrote these giant, long-winded books, but they were like as famous as like the Beatles or like movie stars or something. And people really liked this stuff, this long-form content. And one of the Lincoln-Douglas debates in the middle of the 1800s between then candidate Abraham Lincoln and the guy he was running against. One of those debates, they closed the town for the whole day. The first person spoke for 3 uninterrupted hours, just speaking, no visual aids. Then they took intermission, and everyone went home and had dinner with their families and came back for the rebuttal, which was 4 hours of uninterrupted speaking. And that's today this is unthinkable, because we're bombarded constantly with information, and some of that information is just entertaining. So there's not enough. In the past, there was kind of this free bandwidth for people to just think about what they should do or who they should elect or how to solve their collective problems. But today, there's just this attention economy, and you can't even get people to fill out surveys, to try and improve their hotel experience or whatever. And then my third point here is that society is a lot more complicated now. In the past, I think society was pretty complicated, but it was how complicated can it really be in an era where, so now stuff can happen very, very quickly, and you have the whole teams of specialists. People go to school, they train their entire lives to be a jet fighter, and they know everything about how very quickly you could take off and bomb some facility 800 miles away or something, and there's no way, something like Brexit or so, this is just outside of the scope of should we build more walls or something, so which is more simple thing. Okay. And again, I've done this presentation a lot, and there's so many things I want to talk a lot about, but just touch a little bit briefly on this one here. You have to know a lot of things if you want to vote well. One of them is not only what your existing option is, but who the challenger is, and that seems like a low bar, but we'll see that at the bottom or over here, we're not even at that stage one, because 71% of Americans cannot even name the one congressional representative that is their own congressional representative. But you also need to know the challenger and both of their plans, and also whether or not they're lying about what their plans really are. And even if they're earnest, you need to then figure out what would happen if they actually introduced those plans, and if it would be maybe a giant disaster. So you need to know quite a bit, and usually only a few specialists know that for some crucial decisions. And as I just mentioned, basically no one even knows who it is that they elected in the United States, let alone the challenger or any of the policies. Like, you can go down the line. Sometimes for fun, I ask people to name their congressperson, or I name who they ran against. No one can remember anything. I bet sometimes I do already. People can't even remember like who Hillary Clinton's running mate was and things. That was like just very short time ago. And I have a funny story about these lobbyists who are on a plane, but I think I probably won't tell it unless we have time.
I was looking at that on the slide.
Do you want it? Yeah, I'll tell it to
What
you.
is that?
Okay, so I happen to know I want to out this person, but this person was a congresswoman, and she gave this story, which is very funny. And she is a member of the House of Representatives from state A, and she was in state B flying to Washington, D.C. And lo and behold, next to her on the plane are a bunch of lobbyists, and they were flying also from state B to Washington, D.C., so that they could lobby someone. And the person that they were lobbying was from a different state, state C. And the lobbyists, they had literally studied this person. I think it's not even a joke. They had literally studied them down to their shoe sizes. That's a phrase in English, but I think they literally were like buying this person like some shoes or something crazy like that, or they had like done some of this stuff. So they had all this pages and pages on this one person, the target of their lobbying, and then she asked them if they knew who their own representative was in state B, and they didn't know. So they're professional lobbyists. It's their job to influence the, Congress people, but they only know the one that they're paid to know. Even if they work in the space, they can't be bothered to look it up. And this is a shock. If you pair it with something else, I just think this is unbelievable, and there's no possible way that this is what people had in mind or what in ancient Athens. I just think that there's no possible way that these are the re-election rates, and this is 0 and this is 100% for the United States Senate and the House of Representatives, and almost always the same people get re-elected, even though no one really knows who they are, and the congressional approval rate, is always very low, and for the last 20 years or so, I think it's even been in the single digits. The September 11th, 2001 era notwithstanding. But it had been like below 40% forever, and then just falling, and then below 10%. So there's definitely, this is this rational ignorance component here that people they can't be bothered to look into this, like who they should vote for. It's just too much work. And now I have this thing about electability. So there's this joke, and I researched this on the plane. And I'm wondering if anyone knows what I'm talking about here, because I looked this up, and there's a very famous episode of the American television comedy South Park, and I looked up, I was like, does anyone in Amsterdam watch this? And apparently it is very popular in Amsterdam, and this is from a bunch of years ago, and someone said they know what this is, and so this is a joke, and you can see I censored some of the letters here, but you want to just shout out or explain what's going on in this, I guess you don't have the microphone, but... Yeah, exactly. So this joke is that it's done very well, as only South Park can do with these funny cartoons, so that it's just cleverly hidden enough the parallels to the real world. But basically, this joke kind of spirals out of control, and everyone at this 4th grade class is forced to vote between 2 candidates for mascot, and one of them is a giant douche, and the other one is a turd sandwich. And then the child goes home to complain about how inane this is. And his parents tell him that in every election, it's always between a choice between, a giant douche and a turd sandwich. So that's a very funny thing. So I'll be back with more about rational ignorance, but and I'm going to talk more about electability right after this. But both of the solutions are really can be solved using the same, or I think my guess is that my theory is that they can be solved with these things called conditional prediction markets. So I hope that you have an open mind to that. Now I'm going to talk about this electability thing for a second, because it's amazing how much this one concept ruins not only elections but lots of other things. So why don't we just, if we don't like Congress or something in the United States, I apologize that I didn't want to look up. I did look up a bunch of things about the government here in Amsterdam, but I just thought it would be too much work and too contrived, too much of a put-up job to kind of pretend that I know anything about what's going on here politically. So, but if you don't like the people in charge, and it's a very common thing to complain about. I actually have other slides that I took out about like the mayor from The Simpsons, and because I wasn't sure if anyone here would get that, but it's like every time politicians are portrayed in popular media, like everyone kind of doesn't like them, and so it's like, well, why not? Because we can just get rid of them at any time. And there is an answer to this question, which is that why is it always, between two unlikable candidates? And that is what I'm about to explain. It's something called multi-factor competition. So competition is great, and it works really, really well, but it doesn't work. You have to compete on one thing at a time. So my example here is going to involve one person choosing where he eats for dinner alone, but then he's going to choose where he eats with a group of people. And the group is going to ruin everything, even though everyone involved is individually rational and all of that. So you want to spend up to $20 on dinner. You're choosing and dining alone. And so then all you have to do is compare restaurant A, restaurant B, restaurant C, and what your expected satisfaction is. And then you just decide, well, I think my satisfaction will be highest with restaurant B, and then you pick restaurant B, and it's very easy for you. You get the highest satisfaction possible when you have competition on one dimension, always. But the secondary effect is that the restaurants are induced to compete on this metric here of satisfaction per dollar. So there's a natural corrective force here. You can veto people and find the place that you like the most, and the restaurant that's vetoed too much goes out of business, and their capital is freed up for other things, which is desirable. Okay, so now this is the part where everything is ruined and why we always have unlikable candidates. In the United States, there's a different thing. You guys have proportional representation here, which is, I think, worse, and you should read, Karl Popper wrote an essay about this in The Economist that you should read called The Open Society and Its Enemies. So it's even worse, but the solution I'm going to describe actually works for both situations, but you guys have different problems. You have a dictatorship of the third largest party, or weird party coalitions and other things that I'd also be happy to talk about, but it's a much stronger... Yeah. Well, okay, we'll see. But that doesn't matter. The solution I'm going to pitch will work for both, just as a kind of happy coincidence, maybe. But anyway, here's what's going on here is that a lot of people are choosing to go somewhere, and they want to have the best meal possible, but they also want to show up at the same place that everyone else is showing up. And now your decision depends not only on what you prefer. This is this is the little graphic from the previous slide. Depends not only on what you prefer, but it also depends on where other people might go. And that is itself a function of what they might prefer. Now, I'm going to be very nice here and assume that they have the exact same preferences as you, although Kenneth Arrow won a Nobel Prize for describing that if these are different at all, we're all doomed and we'll never be able to figure out which restaurant to go to using math. But I'm going to say, even though they're the same, because your decision depends on where you think they will go, but that's a function of what you think they prefer, but also where you think they might go. And if you think, and so this actually is an infinite recursing thing here, it just recurses forever, so I could have just put a bunch of things, but instead I just say, well, that's a function of everyone's collective best guess on where most people currently plan on going. which I'm going to call the status quo, even though that's a very kind of free use of that term. But then also, since time and attention and communication and just information processing in general is not free, especially in the human brain, it also depends on how open to communication and negotiation everyone is. So, what I'm saying is, everyone hates restaurant C, but they think everyone else is going there. So this is kind of like a family reunion dinner or something where everyone just, they don't know each other kind of well enough to say that they hate restaurant C, and it might be misconstrued as impolitely saying that you don't like the family gathering or something. So this crazy family just ends up going to restaurant C year after year after year until someone finally reveals that they all hate restaurant. They all hate restaurant C. So you have 4 criteria here, but you have to make one selection. And you end up choosing based on where you think other people might go, because that's more important to you than some other things, which basically the analog for this is that, no one wants anarchy. So we put up with this dumb process that gives us unlikable candidates. But so I have a little bit more of a, yes. So there's, oh, excuse me, yes. Oh, how far away the restaurant is? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Well, that would help in this case, because what I'm saying is that there's some information that you'd have to process, but if there's something everyone should be able to, if everyone's in a group and they're walking around and they have yet to determine the restaurant, they would rely on commonly available signals, like what everyone can see right now, and the fact that everyone prefers to walk. Everyone prefers less walking to more walking. So yeah, that would help. But yes. Okay. Okay, so there's a self-fulfilling prophecy on this last one here, which is that there are some people who will become cynical, kind of Tyrion Lannister types, and they will decide that negotiating to pick a better restaurant is a lost cause, and so there's no point to voting or no point to participating. And then you have all the smartest people dropping out, at which point it becomes even more horrible. So, and this becomes worse when there's lots of people and many alternatives. So in the United States, there's 250 million adults and a near infinite number of policies. So instead, you have this issue where, since you prefer to meet at the same place as everyone else, this is the so-called wasted votes problem, where if you vote for the third-party candidate, you just throw your vote away, and as a result, everyone has to think strategically. That was that second thing about electability. The red part is that when you're doing the primaries in the United States and in other, a version of this crops up in every form of democracy, but when you are whittling down the choices that will be on the ballot in like the pre-ballot phase, you have to know that you may end up hurting your own side by voting for it, because you need to pool all of your votes. It depends a little bit on the voting scheme that's used, but you need to pool all of your votes so that you have enough to actually win the election. And this has happened numerous times in election history, where someone has split the vote and caused their side to lose. I think I explained this already, that you want to stay in sync with others. So that's kind of what's driving all of this here. And then you can compare what it would be like if you wanted to start up a new barber shop versus if you wanted to start up a new Facebook. And I think I put some blue text up here. Yeah, okay. So a lot of people don't like Facebook, and they find that it makes them miserable, and compels them to pretend that their life is better than it is, and post weird pictures, and they kind of understand what's happening to themselves, and they don't like the fact that some weird corporation has all their, a lot of people really don't like Facebook, if you ask them. But they put up with it anyway, because the alternative is not having any Facebook at all, and having basically social isolation in this one narrow sense. But the alternative is this problem that I've been describing, which is an endless and ultimately futile, because you will lose, negotiation with unmotivated friends and family to switch to one particular alternative among many. So everyone will say, oh, we should switch to free book or whatever. But you've got to switch. You got to get all of your friends and family to switch over, and they know when you're talking to them about switching over, they know that they need to convince their own friends, and they need, who in turn need to convince their own friends, and so on and so forth. Since everyone knows that it's just a little bit of intractability is enough to stall this whole process out. There's the self-fulfilling prophecy that I mentioned before, and as I say at the bottom part of this text, that it's the same way that we put up with governments, even though it's a very commonly believed, and I think pretty accurately believed, that they are less than optimally competent, which is because the alternatives are no government at all, or some weird, giant, violent revolution that may not work. But I think we have a question.
Just
Yes.
quickly on the Facebook thing.
Sure.
I don't use Facebook anymore.
Yeah,
And
no,
a
I haven't
lot
used
of-
it in 5 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
But
it
we're like
becomes-
the weird guys, though.
Well, actually,
And in fact, I was literally planning on bringing... I'm literally planning to go back, because now that everyone knows how bad it is, I kind of am a little bit more okay with going back to it.
So
now.
here's the thing, is that you may be tempted to use it because you're a social friends and family, but if you don't use it, they have less incentive to use it.
Correct, yes. No, but
So
that's my point, is that
It becomes
there's a
a
network
self-fulfilling
effect.
prophecy. If everyone stops using it, then
Right, if
it
everyone
disappears.
stopped using it, it'd make it easier. But that's my point, is that there's a kind of gravity to this, where if the Earth were somewhere else, there would be more gravity keeping it there.
But it's the same with governments.
Yeah. No, it is the same. Yes, if we get to a new peak or a new something, a new local optimum. Yes, it is the same. I think. Yes. The problem is getting there. That's what I'm trying to explain. Okay. So I hinted before. Ken Arrow won the Nobel Prize for this. If you have some rules, then basically mathematically it's impossible for preferences to be aggregated, and some of them are just so simple that you almost feel like you can't even state them, like having more than one person involved, so that there's at least two people, and some deterministic way of fusing those preferences. Then you can only have one of these two things mathematically, which is that you can't hurt an option when everyone ranks it higher. So when people are persuaded of something, you can't have the group be persuaded in the same direction, which is, again, these seem like they should all be no-brainers, but mathematically you have to omit one. And the second one is irrelevant alternatives are really irrelevant. So if you had a preference for A or B, I shouldn't say that because that's no good. I should say something like, let's say Churchill versus, I don't know, FDR. So let's say you're electing Churchill and you prefer Churchill to FDR, and then you have Stalin and Hitler. If you prefer Churchill to FDR, and then society runs this algorithm and it says, okay, Churchill wins, and then if you reran it again with everyone swapping how they voted for Stalin versus Hitler in place 3 and 4, it shouldn't then give you the answer of FDR instead of Churchill, because the ones at the top didn't change. And so, but unfortunately, you have to break one of these because for math reasons. So it's an unsolvable problem. So we have that's why in the United States we have this problem of splitting the vote, and where you have you have this thing where votes cast for a lost cause do not contribute at all. But in you guys have proportional representation, which is a slightly different conversation. But there's a version of this theorem that applies to proportional representation because it applies to all preference aggregation. So that is part of why we always have these two people, because you need to vote for someone that you think other people will vote for. Yes.
There's several voting algorithms, like instant runoff.
Yes.
That go along with
They go some way, but they do not actually go. Yeah, the question was about like instant runoff and these other things. You rank a bunch of people, but there's still incentives to put the electable people to misrepresent your own vote. So even though it does help you with the votes like ranked like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it doesn't actually help with the person that you put number 1, because if the other people break with the scheme or the intended scheme and lie and put all of theirs number 1, then the other people, the other team will still win by breaking the scheme. So actually it is unsolvable in this direction, I think. Okay. So, well, yeah, the issue is that, well, I'll explain, is that we want to just look at we want to make it one dimension of competition. So that it's more like the restaurant case before. And so we're going to need a way to get all this information out because of rational ignorance, and then we're going to need to get rid of this electability problem that someone can split the vote and screw with the preference aggregation process of the ballot system itself, and then we need a way to stop this from being captured by anyone who is not a voter. So we want only the voters to be able to influence this process. And that third thing is going to be, the blockchain and Bitcoin and all that other stuff. So what this brings me to what the solution is, and it is these conditional prediction markets. This is Hal Finney. He wrote this on Robin Hanson's blog, overcomingbias.com. And this is Ralph Merkel. And he said there are only a few people alive today worth listening to. Robin Hanson is one of them. So this is Robin Hanson's blog. And this is Hal Finney posting in July 29, 2008 on this topic. So that's just some, social proof and appeal to authority to just kind of maybe liven the mood. It's kind of a long talk. You have to ignore that. Okay. So so I'm going to explain what a normal prediction market is, and then I'm going to explain what these conditional prediction markets are. So a normal prediction market is this thing. It's often called an event derivative. So it pays some amount if the event happens, and it pays nothing otherwise. And this particular example, which I got from InTrade before it was closed down, is about whether or not 2012 will be the warmest year on record. And when this was created, it was January 2011. So this was a long time ago. This slide is from the past. And the market was created in January 11, and then it traded at these prices until the end of 2012, of course, when it settled in January 13, which is the end there. And it's what was worth $100 if 2012 was the warmest year on record. So you could bet on this before 2012 even started, which is this first half here on the horizontal axis. And then in 2012, it became slowly clear that it was not in the cards, and that even though 2014 was the warmest year on record at the time, 2012 was not going to be. And so it ended up being worth zero, because it's worth zero if it doesn't happen, and it's worth $100 if it does happen. Now, the issue here is that you can reference the current price as a kind of probability, a society's aggregated knowledge about the likelihood of the event. So it traded from this initial price, which is about $40 for something that's worth $100 if the thing happens. And then the price went up to $50, and then it went all the way down to $0 when it inevitably, well, not inevitably, but when it ultimately did not happen. And so the issue is that a lot of people take issue with this some people have some hang-ups when it comes to markets, and it's like some free market people say that free markets not only make people rich, but they're also like really good for society, and people have a hang-up about that. And now I'm kind of also saying that they're also smart, which is like almost too much for some people. But the issue here is that it's a kind of proof by contradiction, which is that if this price were not really truly representative of the objective knowledge that was existing in society, then someone or some fund or something, some group of people or some kind of co-op or something, there's some feedback process in place to correct that error. So if it were really if this market were on something that everyone thought was definitely going to happen in 2012, then the prices would not have started at 40, and then they would not have kind of declined to zero. They would have started at 70 or 80, and they would have gone up to 100. So nothing is perfect, and nothing can see the future, which is another hang-up I think people have on prediction markets. They're like, what kind of magic is this that you're telling me you know everything about society's knowledge or something? So nothing can, if you did a coin flip, the prices would have to be 50-50 until the coin landed, because these only allow you to aggregate knowledge that actually exists in society. And so they're not like some magical perfect thing. A last hang up before I go on to the next slide is that there's a lot of ignorance of probability. So an event, something is trading on 25 cents on the dollar, it should happen exactly 1 out of every 4 times, but I have a million friends. Something is trading at 25 cents on the dollar in a prediction market world, and I say, well, it's probably not going to happen. It's only got a 25% chance of happening, and then most of the time, 3 out of 4 times, it doesn't happen. But then when the 4th time happens, you get a bunch of emails from people telling you that the market was wrong or something, when in reality it was 100% perfectly calibrated. So, but this is the kind of the pitch that there's a tight connection here between the price and the likelihood of the event. And if you can soup this up, then by adding some more anonymity and making sure the costs are very low and making sure there's not a lot of friction, you can try to get a greater fine tuning of this feedback so that the connection is more and more tight. And unlike the voting I mentioned before, the scaling is very good, because the more people who know about a market, the more people will kind of glance at it and see if it looks totally wrong to them, and the more liquidity will be in the market, and so the transaction frictions will be even lower. And so, I already explained this, it's okay. Now, the interesting thing about this is that not only is this information very accurate, but it's common. So not only everyone gets the same information, but everyone knows that everyone else got it. So it's very much unlike the example where everyone hated the restaurant, but didn't know that everyone hated the restaurant. With this, everyone knows the exact same information. And so you have this, it's what's called common knowledge in the field of game theory. So like private knowledge is something that only you know. Mutual knowledge is like a very dramatic kind of knowledge that 2 people know something, but they don't know that the other knows it. So like if you oversaw someone murder someone, and they know they murdered the person, and but you saw from far away, and then you see them later getting coffee or something, and it's a very dramatic kind of, because you're pretending, and he doesn't know that you saw, and all this other stuff. But common knowledge is when everyone knows. It's like this presentation right here, where you are all watching, and you all know that everyone else can see it. So these kind of do all the research, and they do all the persuading, which is it's kind of a tough sell to say this one little thing just gets you up on these little estimates for things. Something very hotly debated in the United States is global warming, and a lot of people don't, they're not ready to leave whatever trench they're in, of which there are many, but this is kind of the pitch for this part of it. But as I said, there's more to it, the conditional aspect that I'll get to later. But yeah, I think, okay, the other thing I'll mention this forces a clear definition. So actually the example that I used over here is you could click into like a little thing and see what the fine print was. And it said, okay, we're going to look at this NASA satellite, and it's going to do global surface temperature anomaly, and NASA is going to publish this on this URL or whatever. So that's a lot better, because a lot of people use disagreements just for social reasons and just to posture and just to kind of like have a lot of fun, and they're not caring about the issue a lot is not really the point. It's just like, being loyal to your, tribe or party or whatever. And so definitely in the United States, global warming is just kind of a flag for people to join their respective camps, and no one has really even given any thought to like defining exactly what would it mean, which is in this case specific satellite, specific website, specific everything, specific metric, global surface temperature anomaly, and a very specific thing here, 2012 being the warmest year on record. And so you can argue about whether or not that represents global warming, which is a good conversation to have, but then you sidestep a lot of this stuff where people are just talking on and on and on about abstractions, abstractions like global warming or gun control or whatever, stuff that's very vague, which you don't want at all. Okay, so yes, I say at all times everyone agrees with the price, which is again a very extreme claim, but the proof is by contradiction, because you can make expected profits if you don't agree with it. Now, there's a lot of, risk aversion, and if the transaction costs are low, and if people really trust that this software works, and blah, 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 blah. But I think those problems are very fixable over time. You can accumulate trust in the institution and make it more user-friendly and all these other things. So this is the, kind of a claim that this price is the society's aggregated knowledge, and so that's kind of a neat thing here. Okay, so now I have to talk about how does this end up actually solving any problems? Because so far we've only been able to do like one little thing with one little market that's yes or no. And this is not, what Hal Finney wrote the blog post about conditional markets. The conditional markets are where the magic really happens, because we don't just want to know like, will someone win some sporting game, or will someone win an election? We really want to know like, we want relationships between things. So this is probably too confusing because it's an earlier version, but I have a cool example here that I will now attempt, because I constantly refine this talk and I'm very unhappy with it, to be honest with you, but I think it's getting better. So now I'm trying, attempt to teach conditional probability. So here's the thing, is that before we had a market that had a state, and it was worth $100 if global warming, but worth 0 otherwise. And that chart, there was only one price that was plotted, because it would have been a total waste of chart space to plot both of the lines, because they would have been a perfect mirror of each other. So that would have been a total waste of time. You could have said the opposite one would have been worth $100 if global warming was not the warmest year on record, and that one would have started at 60 and it would have gone up to 100. So, but that would have been a total waste of ink. But now it's not going to be a perfect mirror, because we're going to add lots more states, and it's going to be very complicated. So it'll make for cooler graphs that you'll see in a second. But I first have to explain what on earth is going on in these graphs. So what I have first is an example where you flip 2 coins, and you are betting on the total outcome of what happened there. And you say one coin could be heads and one coin could be tails, and the second coin could be heads or it could be tails. And as a result, they should all be trading at 25 percentage points, because each state is equally likely. The first coin could be heads, the second coin could be heads or tails, or the first coin could be tails, and the second could be heads or tails. Now, I want to imagine something really weird that would never happen in the real world, but will probably maybe help me explain this concept, which is that what happens if you accidentally, when you were setting this market up or something, like you register all the coins as different, like coin number 3, coin toss number 4, coin toss number 5, and you accidentally have the market be set up so that both of these axes are the same coin. And this is ask the audience time, so, because this part is confusing, and I get questions about it later because I don't explain it very well. But the question is, if you have, it's the same coin, then, and if these, what should the prices end up being very quickly? Yes.
0.5, 0, 0, 0.5.
Yes, exactly. That's it. I didn't set up this thing yet, but I'll advance to the next slide. So similar, maybe you could say this is 2 dice, and you roll the 2 dice, and let's say you accidentally, someone sets it up so it's the same die. They say this is the green dice, and whatever the green dice is this, and whatever the green dice is this, as a mistake. But this would never happen in the real world. But if that did happen, this is just slightly more advanced version of this. But what do you think these prices would be? Moments after you set up the market. Yeah, zeros on the diagonal. Yes, precisely. Yes. So what I'm trying to explain here is that as the events become more objectively related to each other, these prices kind of do this weird thing where they kind of bunch up in these observable ways. And this is a cool thing. Oh, and if you do this, you get everything that you had before. You get what's called the marginal probability just by adding. So you get just from addition. Let me put this back up. You can see that if you just add across the rows that it's 50-50 for the first coin, and 50-50 for the second coin, and 50-50 for the first coin, and 50-50 for the first coin as measured redundantly by the other dimension. And so you get everything. You don't lose a single thing. You get everything you got before, but you get even more. You get these conditional probabilities that you can that reveal the relationship between things. So you'd have professional speculators who research these issues and become specialists on whether or not Brexit would affect whatever. And so this is no surrender of sovereignty here. This is just giving advice to the voter. So the voter can still decide what they want, but we're getting very, very, very high manipulation-resistant knowledge emerging here. So this is again an old slide because I made it before. Believe it or not, I've been doing this project for a while, and this image is very old in particular. But This is, if you passed, so I'm imagining, you have to imagine that we're in like 2014 or something for this. And so I'm saying next year, if we pass some law, will it actually affect our odds of getting will the law actually change our likelihood of getting the warmest year on record? And you do that by just comparing the ratio of the prices when you don't do the law to the ratio of the prices if you do pass the law. And I have an even more crazy example here. So this is the guy who's the CEO of General Electric, a gigantic corporation in the United States. And I just want to kind of quickly just try to get through to what's going on, because this problem is not just, the problems I've mentioned apply equally to actually CEOs, because they're also elected. The board of directors is elected, or at least the bylaws can determine how that exactly happens, but mostly the shareholders vote and elect the board of directors who hires the CEO. So this problem is present in corporations as well as in the public sector. It's the same voting problem. So I wanted to kind of make that with this example. And it's easier in the corporation case because you have a clear metric. Determining the metric is a little difficult, like what is good? Should we reorganize society based on how likely it is to get global warming down? Like, probably not reorganize everything in society. There's things that are more important than that, like not dying or something. So, but with the corporation it's easier because the stock price, inclusive of any lawsuits or any kind of being sued for fraud or something, inclusive of all of that, is really just the metric. And so I have here this example of this mirroring that I brought up before. So if you just start with one dimension and you say, will this guy stay as the CEO? And you can see, oh, something weird is happening, but these are, the no and the yes are a mirror image, which is why it's pointless to plot it, because it's a waste of space, because there's only 1 degree of freedom here. So you should only have one line. That's like, but then below I have a second separate market. So it's completely separate, and then I'm going to combine them later. And that's the stock price of GE in the future. So this market is created today, and I'm saying, what's the price going to be on whatever this is, May 2nd, next year? So, and then we're going to move through time. So you have to actually, I think, kind of turn your brain to the attention mode to kind of figure out this asset is going to pay out something based on something that happens in the future, and it's going to be created here, and then we're moving through time to the present, and this is the present moment, which is after, whatever this is, 26 weeks after this was created, but still before this event has happened. But it's a basic law of finance that whatever the future value of something should equal the present value of something minus modulo the interest rate, the time value of money. And so this thing your guess at what the stock price will be next year should really just be the stock price today. So they're kind of similar. I hope that wasn't confusing, because I actually can't remember why I brought it up at all. But the point is, the corporation stock price is going down, and the CEO may stay or he may leave. It seems like there's tremendous uncertainty there, and we're wondering, like, is the CEO jumping ship, or should we fire him because things aren't going very well? And this is a totally contrived example, of course. I just invented all these numbers for the example. But what I say now is you take the two separate markets and you combine them. And after you combine them, you can then re-separate them by just adding, like I did with the coins. And if you add, this is 1 plus 3, the price of 1 plus 3, and then it is the green line that you saw before, and then its mirror is the red, which is 1 minus that. And then you can add 1 and 2 here, and you get this blue line that you had before. So you get everything that you had before, as I said. But you get this cool thing where you get you get all the dimensions at once, and then without making it too kind of like, I could explain the details, but I think, I'm worried about losing people here. But long story short, if you just do some basic arithmetic, you have here the stock price if the CEO stays in red, and the stock price if the CEO leaves in blue. So you can just see as clear as day that it's higher if he stays. So in this contrived example that I just invented, you can see that the CEO is sort of doing a better job than whoever the expected replacement is. So I don't want to go into that, but yes. Okay, so you can use this for basically everything. That's a slide that I removed, but it's a kind of funny one. But So it's like which CEO makes the stock price the best? And again, this is the same. Is a collective action problem that the shareholders face. If you own shares of anything, you get stuff in the mail where it's like, should you vote for this? And you throw it away in the trash immediately because you have no idea what they're talking about, and you have like no 0% of the company. But this would actually be helpful for you to know. Oh, okay, should I get rid of these board of director people, or should we take XYZ action or something? And then you say, oh, which president would make the unemployment rate the lowest, because we don't like unemployment? Or you could say, which Fed policy helps GDP the most, or will this law, change crime, or will any of these things happen? So that's the cool thing. And now I have to explain the multi-factor part, which is really the same thing. And again, I do apologize. I planned on changing these to more European things, but then I decided that would be just too absurd for me to try to do, and that I would probably say something like embarrassing or something like that. So I kept the Democrat and the Republican are the two major parties in the United States, and Elon Musk is a guy who makes electric cars and giant spaceships, so hopefully you know who that is. But I'm saying now that with this multidimensional trick, you can erase this pernicious effect of why you always have the two terrible candidates, because what you are going to do is condition it on the likelihood that they win to cancel out all of the badness associated with the fact that some people are unelectable for some mundane, trivial reason, like they misspoke or they tripped or something. It's so funny, right? Like if someone trips, you imagine someone like walking out into a presidential debate, and if you have like a primary debate, and if someone like just tripped and fell over, like even if they were the best person for the job on planet Earth, if they tripped and fell over and it was on camera, it would probably that would be the end of the, it kind of it boggles the mind that how do we even run society when the best person can be, you wouldn't do that if you were hiring someone. You were trying to hire someone to like head up the new division for your corporation or for your nonprofit or something. Just because they trip, you would still probably offer them the job. You would just be like, oh no, you tripped. But when it comes to voting, it's like if someone does any gaffe, it's just over. It doesn't make any sense to me. But that's okay. So the issue is, we're going to say, will someone win? Is this dimension, and it's split into 4 states instead of 2, just like I split the dice thing into 6 instead of 2. And then I'm going to say, is there a good economy in the United States, where I defined it as less than 5% unemployment as measured by whatever, U3 as reported by the Fed. So yeah, you can have conversations about whether or not those, I'm going to get to that in a second, which is like, are those numbers coming in, and is it garbage in, garbage out? Like, what do we do with these metrics coming in? Because it's just more, again, as I mentioned, this topic is very big, and I can only talk about so many aspects of it at once. But here we're going to say, does someone win, and or is the economy good? And we see there's almost certainly going to be a terrible economy, 0.99, and Elon Musk is almost certainly not going to be elected, 0.009, but he's of the 0.009, and of the 0.0095 we've got of being a good economy, it all is kind of on the Elon Musk tile, so to speak. And so even though Elon Musk is a lost cause, you can do some division here and display this to the user. And again, I'm going to explain, because the user friendliness is obviously terrible at first, but I think it will get there. But you can say, okay, if you elect this person, conditional on electing Elon Musk, how likely is it that the economy will be good? And then it will be 100% versus 0. And then I have here that you can, yes. So now, even though that Elon Musk's, it's kind of paradoxical because you've measured the electability of Elon Musk and determined it to be very low. But because you have measured it explicitly, you can actually factor it out of the good economy thing just by dividing by it. And so since the election, these are all, prices of stuff that hasn't happened yet in the future. So the vision I have is that people are lining up to vote and they've done no research, and then they log on with their phone and they see something like 2-week moving averages of these prices or something, and they just think, well, I've done no research at all, but I really should vote. And they kind of just look up this blue section, and they're just like, well, So that's the vision, is that people would stop caring because they'd be like, well, it says that Elon Musk probably won't win, but these guys are not helping me out at all. And what the heck does this system know anyway? Because we've elected unelectable people before, Donald Trump, etc. So then I would get the voter. The voter would be like, come on, like, who cares about that? It says .009. I've got nothing to lose. This is my vote. And then they just say, well, let's, all the voters waiting in line are like, oh, okay, well, why not? Let's put the vote on this guy because we know that he's got the 100. He's actually got the highest number, so he actually kind of becomes electable again. And so this is better for all the people who are uninformed or angry because, in fact, the less they know, the better because they should ignore all the weird media campaigns and all of the other attempts to kind of influence their vote and just focus on things like this. We can have a conversation about manipulation, but the more everything is just confusing for them, the more they might just fall back on relying to this. And again, I want to remind you that 71% of Americans don't even have a clue who their representative is, and most of them don't vote at all, especially in the House of Representatives legislation kind of section. So almost no one is voting, and almost no one cares about this. So those people are like a raw material, like a resource. You just get this uninformed vote to become informed. And so it's just like that mentioned before at the restaurant where you had the 3 blue bars and one of them became green as the selection. But I'd like to explain a little bit in more detail how So here's the thing is, what if you don't know if Elon Musk or Peter Thiel is the best because you think they're both pretty great? And maybe they're both unelectable. But maybe Elon Musk is even more unelectable than Peter Thiel, who was someone who is he was like a delegate in California, but also a kind of engineer type or something. And then, they have like Oprah, and this is Kim Kardashian, it's like whatever. So you have all these up, and then you think, oh no, the vote is going to be split between Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. The smart person vote is going to be split. And so then I have to go back to voting for the lesser of two evils because the vote is going to be split. But you actually don't because only one of them has the highest number. So the smart people will just say, well, I was pushing for Peter Thiel, but 100% is bigger than 99%. So there it is. And then you have so then you've escaped electability. And then just 2 more slides about, So what's my plan for like actually making this happen other than, writing the code and everything? I think you have to kind of ramp it up using things that people already care about, like sports and whatever. People love sports betting, Probability of someone winning, conditional on them being, 2 onside kicks or something. I don't know. This is probably even the wrong. I don't know anything about what would interest people, but and then you just kind of need to do it for a couple of years along a variety of things. And this has already been done, and the accuracy has been proven, and so. You just have to show it to people. It's a little bit more of letting them experience kind of what's going on. And again, I think people hate the existing system so much in the United States, and most don't vote at all. So I think there's kind of there's a little niche here for it to kind of work its way in. In fact, on CNBC, I remember in 2004, they mentioned it once or twice and interviewed John Delaney, the CEO of Intrade, where I got that slide, where I got that image from those prices. And then he died on an unrelated Mount Everest accident, which is real, and threw the company into chaos. Long story. But CNBC has done more and more, American Television Network has done more and more coverage of these betting market prices, even after Intrade closed down after 2012. And the new website, Election Betting Odds, showed up, and then they do Betfair here in Europe on them. So I think actually people are kind of getting in more. Yeah, this is, again, the topic is so broad that you can't possibly talk about all of it at once, but it's like, what on earth are we going to actually measure? Is it going to be all unemployment rate? What should it be? It could be land value. I think that's a good one. Or it could be anything that humans can measure kind of with a random poll of their kind of jurisdiction or something. This is a very complicated topic in itself without how to get that not captured. But there are these ways. Sortition is like randomly picking names out of a hat. And then you can you could have people, you could call people the way in the United States we do jury duty. You just call people over and say, force them to report on, what their salary is, if they were unemployed, how much they like their government or whatever, just kind of. And then there are all these clever tricks, random response and things to like force some noise. But yeah, this is a whole topic in itself, and we don't have time for it. So that is just a crazy introduction to my project, and it's super weird, but it is actually relatively. So you can go to this site, bitcoinhivemind.com, and I had a bunch of people look at it, including a little bit, including Adam Back, Peter Todd, Andrew Polstra, Roger Ver. So a lot of people like this idea, and it's sort of old. So it's time for it to come back. You saw there was the Hal Finney post from like 2004 or 2008 or whenever that was. So it's kind of a cool idea. So that's the talk. And if anyone has any ideas on how to improve the talk, please come up to me later, because it's a lot to get across, and I'm not sure what the best way is. So anyway, so that is the talk. So thank you very much. Yes. Oh, yes. Okay. So if you go to the site, you'll see we don't exactly have, because the weird thing is I designed it to be a sidechain of Bitcoin, and sidechains of Bitcoin are also held up. But we have a kind of test net that it not only has, it has like a little GUI with little graphs. But yeah, there's a lot of improvements still to be done. But there is actually there's a version of this on the site, and everyone should check it out. And we did rebase it to a recent Bitcoin core version, like 8 months ago. So it's not hopelessly obsolete. And I've been trying to keep all these things synchronized. So yeah, there is some stuff. There's lots to do still, but there's like a minimum viable thing there that you can run on testnet. Yes. Should we wait for should we do the thing, or should we know? Oh, there we go.
Perfect. Okay, so I think you made a very persuasive argument for the use of prediction markets, and I have a kind of philosophical question. So I think the general argument is that we can do this sort of collective market mechanism, and that humans are good sort of transducers of information from the environment into this market mechanism, which can then optimize the decision. So I guess my question is, like, do you really just need humans at all for the system? What if you just had sensors or other information? There's no humans,
question.
Just sensors, basically.
This can only
robots.
give advice. So it will optimize. So what this will do is attempt to aggregate society's information on whether or not someone elected will move some metric up or down more than someone else. But it says nothing about values. So maybe you want the unemployment rate to go up for some reason. It's like it says nothing at all about values, and you could have several different markets all on different things, and people could aggregate those values in different ways. Like someone might say, oh, I don't know, I really don't want. Someone could say Brexit's going to cost us a lot of money, as estimated by this market. But someone else could say, oh, Brexit is going to result in XYZ immigration or something. And everyone could be in perfect agreement about all those numbers, and then just say, well, I care about immigration more than I care about how much money it will cost, because the UK is a rich, whatever, blah, blah, blah country, so we can afford it. So it says nothing about values whatsoever.
Have you read the book Brave New World, and what do you think about it?
Yes, it's a good book. In fact, Aldous Huxley's book partially inspired Neil Postman's book, I'm Using Ourselves to Death, which is the book that I mentioned before, which is about how media ecology has shaped the way we run society, including the elections, where instead of having the 3-hour, 4-hour super debate of just uninterrupted talking, we have like televised 30-second rebuttal or something like that. But yeah, it's good. I think I'm more worried about 1984. The thesis of part of the ending of Neil Postman's book was that 1984 threat was overemphasized, and that the Brave New World threat was underemphasized, and that we should have worried more about Brave New World. But I don't know. I mean, there might be a tie or something. It's not looking very good. But the 1984 one is looking especially bad. That stuff in China is just like that's just exactly as Phil Zimmerman said. It's just just pure stasis forever, and that is horrible. I mean, it's just those people will be trapped until something. It'll be exactly like the Great Wall of China, really, where they'll be trapped until some other technological force is just like I don't know exactly how to describe what I'm saying, but until they are disrupted by the fact that they've been held back on new ideas forever. So that's a sad thought. Yes.
Does your system deal with the fact that like unemployment, like you say that these are like factors which have delayed effects on society? Is that calculated in there somehow?
Yeah, as I say, yes, that's a good question. It goes into what I said before about values. So it's true that in the world of economics, it's often said like the stock market's like a leading indicator, and then there are these other things that are present indicators, and then the unemployment rate is a lagging indicator, and so the economy goes bad, the stock market crashes immediately, but then people don't start getting laid off for like a couple months or something. But this is just, I mean, if you wanted to account for that, you could just put the unemployment rate on different dates. You could say, well, what's the unemployment rate? What's the stock market going to be in March? And what's the unemployment rate going to be in September? And try to harmonize them. But there's no need for this project to take that type of thing. The topic, the topic of the market, like what is it about? That has nothing to do with exactly how the project works, because you can change that to try to do anything you like. That, I mean, it would be a waste of time to do something that wasn't measurable, like, you know, what is your favorite color, and I have things in there to kind of jam that halfway through to make it impossible to work. But yeah, this project takes no position on what you would want to know. So you may want to know the unemployment rate, or you may not think that the unemployment rate is interesting.
Thoughts on selling your vote? So if somebody doesn't have like they don't value their vote, but maybe somebody else values that vote for $1.
Yes, there is Robin Hanson, the blog that I quoted earlier that Hal Finney posted on. He wrote something about quadratic voting, which I think is unfortunately too complicated for anyone to realistically switch from a current mode of voting to that. But there's a kind of weird thing where you could accumulate your vote and it would square, and then you could sell it or something. But this takes no position also on whatever society is really using, because this is about getting the equal amount of knowledge to everyone. At once in the form of the price, which that everyone sees. Everyone sees the same price. So it kind of doesn't really matter, as I said, if you use proportional representation or some other kind of voting. This should work in all of those situations, and in all those situations you still have the problem that the Ken Arrow Nobel Prize problem of that whatever you come up with, it will probably not really work, because there are two conflicting ideas embedded in voting. One is that everyone should be represented, and the other is that the outcome should be rational. And you actually can only have one in the mathematics of aggregating the vote. So the one that most people pick is that the outcome should be rational, and that some people should be. But that's not what you picked with proportional representation. But again, it's a different conversation. But the idea is that the vote should be a guess at what everyone will ultimately agree on. They'll ultimately find to be non-controversial. So if you vote to get rid of slavery, or you vote to establish women's rights or something, what's really going on is that you're kind of guessing at what everyone will agree was always the right answer in the future. So these schemes about changing the voting mechanism are not, I think they're not what this project is about, because this should work for just about any weird voting, any weird aggregating thing. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I have a few questions, but I have to pick one, right? Yeah.
Okay, you got to pick one.
There's issues
Well, you
with
have to pick one
liquidity
first.
because
Yes.
the Elon Musk market would obviously have low liquidity.
Yes, liquidity. Yes, excellent question.
So
Do
that
you want,
one.
you want me to take them one at a
But you
time?
can probably like say a shit ton about
Yes,
liquidity.
well, there is. Okay, so
And the answer is probably just going to be you try and get as much liquidity as you can.
no, you're right. But no, that's not. You're wrong about the answer. But I can talk a lot about how that's done because you are completely correct that why would anyone buy this weird state in this giant dimensional thing? And the answer is that in this, the market is done in a different way using something called a market scoring rule that Robin Hanson actually invented for this purpose, and he's a physicist. And I don't know why I brought that up because that's an appeal to authority, and so is this. But but Robin Hanson is the guy who runs this blog, and he's over down here, and he invented this thing where actually no matter how many states the market has, you can always trade against the market itself, and you don't actually need a counterparty. So someone, when the person who creates the market puts a little bit of money up as a kind of sacrifice, and then it's kind of like you have a dish, and you have it balanced on a needle, and people put money on, and the dish kind of tilts around. And the angle of the dish is actually what determines the prices and how many different marbles people get.
Only one state is picked, so you only need one underwriting.
Yeah, you only need, there's a little bit of money in the center at first, and then everyone can show up and make trades even without any counterparty at all. So the liquidity can never fall to zero. So it will always be possible to update the market price, which means it will always be possible for someone who notices an error in the entire array of prices to update it. So it's actually 100% solved, and more to the point, it's actually much easier in blockchain technology to just have this thing just be a sequence of atomic updates in a line. So it's actually solved several different problems at once. But as I mentioned, the project's kind of big, and you can only talk about so many things at a time. But you're absolutely correct that that would have killed the project.
That actually fixes it really well, so that's cool.
Yeah. It does.
I'll look into that.
It is pretty cool.
The other question was about that market efficiency arguments depend upon bad money eventually leaving the market fully, or at least like significantly.
Well, yeah, that's another
not coming
giant
in
thing.
faster than it's leaving. And because even though this system is like quite, cyberspace and quite purist, and so it can hardly be uneconomical. It can persist in being uneconomical, but the money that it's set in could still be secretly not performing the economic function.
Yes, this is the manipulated prices question, right? Yes, I think so.
No, it's worse because it's the money itself.
Okay, what was it then? I didn't understand.
So if the rest of the world is not economically minded and efficient enough, there is no guarantee that your prediction markets will have more good than bad money in it, and they'll consistently produce bad results due to the inefficiencies of the actual market, like in practice.
Okay, so the question is, I'm not sure, like what I'm not sure what really good or bad money means, but I assume that you mean that yes. Okay, well, this again, another thing I didn't explain is how I solved the Oracle problem, which is how this technology becomes aware of actually what the unemployment rate is or who was actually elected, which is itself a document that I wrote and is on the front page of the website, bitcoinhivemind.com, and is very long and filled with lots of writing and math and things in there. But I did not explain that at all because I tried to give that talk and it's hopelessly boring and no one can really, I don't do a good job of explaining it, I guess. But in the software, I have a little simulator. You can open it up and click on this little beaker thing, icon, and it will show up and you can say, oh, what if the people try to resolve the outcomes this way or that way, and you can see if you can try to break any of my security assumptions. But I don't think, was that what you were asking about, is how does the protocol figure out what actually happened? Or you were saying that people will bet and they will be bad people who will just bet randomly or something? Not good at betting. Oh yes, so this is the low knowledge, I think you're saying. Okay, I think, yes. So yeah, the market can only aggregate knowledge that is present in the minds of the traders. So if the traders don't know anything, it's useless. So as I explained with the okay, let me finish this one in a second. So it's like if you have a prediction market on the outcome of a fair coin toss, then you cannot gain any. It would be 50-50. No one would pay 60 cents for one of these states because the other person would buy the alternative state for 40 cents, knowing that it's a fair coin and that over the long run, they will tend to do well. So, but is that what you were saying or no? No, I'm saying in the general economy, somehow it doesn't function perfectly. It will create some inefficiencies, which will result in some people that shouldn't have money because they're not good at
Sure. Yes.
they're not doing
I agree.
criminals can get a lot of money through many ways. Let's say the mafia in Italy does really, really well.
Okay.
Subsequently, this prediction market can seem legitimate, but the mafia has most of the money, so it seems right.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So the question is a kind of plutocracy question that says, what if most of the people who have money have an agenda, and then they can manipulate this market? But this is not a plutocracy. This is not like $1, one vote. This is like $1 risked, one vote. So if you have a plutocracy, you could just keep it in something else, and it would be safe. It would safely earn a whatever 4% return or whatever it would earn. You don't have to risk it in this. And so if you did, you would be risking that you would lose it. Yeah. 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 Yes. No, but it's not, though, because think about this. You have to get the actual metric up. So even if you manipulate the prices tremendously, you have to actually you manipulate the prices tremendously and no one has enough money to defeat you, then you will get whoever it is, Donald Trump. You'll get Donald Trump elected instead of Elon Musk. Yeah, but no, let me explain. No, because I think I understand what you're saying. So it's like you will get your way a few times, but inevitably you'll get Donald Trump and the unemployment rate. The price of that other thing will remain low or will be at 0 instead of 100. So all the people who can cast counter bets and they say, well, you see, because it's mathematically identical. It's like yes is 1 minus no, and so you could buy, if you thought Elon Musk would do well, you can buy this, or you can buy everything other than. You can just say, instead, I know that Hillary Clinton will screw it up, so I buy all these other ones. So because I know that there's not a chance that she'll do a good job. And so then you get something for less than $1 that ends up being $1. And so you still make money. So even though you can, if you have most of the money, you can manipulate the outcome. The few people who are forecasting accurately will be multiplying their wealth by 5 times or each cycle. And so eventually they will be the ones that have all of the money, and it will create exponentially more money to manipulate the system. Yes. Rational ignorance.
Yeah, rational ignorance. If for example, the baker causes
Sure.
to do irrationally better, and that will be unreasonably represented in the prediction market. So
Yep.
that will have an undue influence on the outcome of the prediction market.
No, not necessarily, because this is, again, the traders are free to decline. They can say, I can't improve on this array of prices. So they can say, even though I've got a lot of money and I could move the prices to whatever I want, they'd say, well, they kind of look correct to me, so instead I'm going to do something else with my money. I'm going to go play golf or something, But if there's an error in the prices, anyone can. Yes. No, but you understand it's different from voting, because if you feel very strongly about something, you can put more of your wealth into it. You could even maybe take out a loan or something. So this is not necessarily just measuring one vote per person. Each person is free to modulate their influence in the market by how confident they are. So a lot of people take positions and then they take positions on global warming, and then they won't bet in the global warming market. So what do they really believe?
We've got time for one
Yes.
last question.
Okay, let's go. There's more questions. Yes.
Emmanuel Wallerstein, he's a world systems theorist, and what he describes is that we are in what is called a bifurcation point, which is in the last 100 years or so, it was very easy, there was a very linear kind of course for the destination of events. For example, like when you see the price on a market is going up, it's very easy to predict where it's going to go next. But when in a system, there are too many when a system isn't able to accurately, when a kind of worldview isn't able to completely account for all of the variables or all of the phenomena, those kind of factors can build up in a system, and what happens is a complex system reach a kind of tipping point where things start to cascade. And when a system, so for example, like when the price starts to go down, it becomes very difficult to predict at what rate it's falling, how far it's going to drop, and until what level it's going to go down. And the entire, I think the entire premise of what you're talking about is the people voted for Donald Trump because they were misinformed, and if they were informed, maybe they could make a better decision. What if people? What if people were informed and still chose to vote for Donald Trump? And what if history shows us that this is the inevitable course of all human civilizations, and that there is no mechanism that is going to save us from a process of renewal that's inherent in civilization itself?
I think that's far too pessimistic to make any sense.
Not pessimistic, it's renewal.
Yeah, the idea that there's
rebirth.
the idea that there's no possibility of technological improvement, I think, is very pessimistic.
Well, look at.
Well, I don't know. Then, if it's a rebirth, then how is it different from what happened the last 30 years or the last 70 years?
Well, would you say the Roman Empire breaking up and Christianity taking over in Europe was progress, or was that regression? Was the ending of slavery in Rome, was that something that was bad, or?
Well, yeah. Well, I think it's clear now with hindsight. It's interesting. Today, everyone agrees that slavery was wrong, but in the past, it was a hotly debated issue, and a lot of people took it for granted that slavery was the morally correct position, and that it was. So obviously, that's not. Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, so it's a question about knowledge, though. I mean, it was originally taken. A lot of things were originally taken for granted, and then we had to learn more, and improve our legal and governance technology. We had to improve our laws, and they were improved many different times. I mean, there was a time when there was no democracy whatsoever, and then in ancient Athens, it was accidentally introduced by someone who was using it for selfish reasons, and they just kind of kept doing it. And then Rome had all kinds of weird tinkering that they were doing with their setup. But yeah, I don't know if I would call the Enlightenment progress, and I would call ancient Greece progress, but I don't know. Maybe I would call Florence in the 1300s, but I don't know if I would call it. And everything after the Enlightenment in the West, I would call progress, but I don't know if I would call anything else. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's funny that people do that at like the World Bank. Yeah. Well, the joke is that it should just measure energy consumption, and that it's something very from the STEM department, right? That it's just like doesn't have any of these. But as I said, it's not. This project takes no stance on values. It just tries to provide people with information, and I think it's plausible that if people had more information, they might still have voted for Donald Trump.
5 minutes?
Yeah. No, I thought if we have more questions, we can.
So last question then. Let's make this, all right.
Room for something completely different?
Yeah.
What was your, what did you think about the conference in Lisbon?
Oh, yeah, yes. I was at the Lisbon conference. That's a good one. You're really kind of, well, actually, that's funny that you mentioned that. I had a great time at the conference in Lisbon, building on Bitcoin. It was yesterday and the day before. And it's great to see everyone, as always, and people present a lot of interesting ideas. But I kind of wonder about something. I have a very different view, and I have no idea if how many people share this view. But for me, there's a kind of drama in the space that makes the conferences much more exciting. And so you had Scaling 1 in Montreal in 2015, and that was just like so exciting. And then stuff kind of gets old, and like our Scaling 3 wasn't as interesting as Scaling 1 and 2. And then it was kind of like Breaking Bitcoin kind of for some reason it had more drama. And I think these things where all the technical people meet they go through these waves somehow. I can't quite explain it, and I don't want to attribute it to anyone or anything. I don't understand it myself, but I think sometimes there's just a need for a conference and it just appears, and it's a great success. And it's like lightning in a bottle or something. And then people try to replicate it, and it's parts of it get just a little bit less interesting. And sometimes I feel that way, that there's a kind of capture. That something is a success, and then everyone wants to affiliate with the success, and then you kind of have these weird cycles. And so I enjoyed it a lot. I loved, especially that I presented at the second half of day 2, and I loved that half not just because I was in it, but there was a lot of stuff that referenced my kind of areas of interest, including Sergio's drive chain thing, and also talks about like super soft forks and these other kind of theoretical things that I'm interested in. And so I like that. I don't know. It's like these conferences. We do so many conferences, and it's very hard to like put any of them into context. But yeah, I thought it was very neat. I think the community is very. It's a very interesting. If you watch my talk, then it's a little bit of it is about kind of my frustration with how slow things are in terms of the reactivity to altcoins. But a lot of people are very proud of the fact that they are resistant to any mental manipulation at all. They say, oh, we're not going to let that affect our decisions, our technical decisions, which is admirable in a sense, but that is a kind of a weird difference of opinion. And you do see a lot of that with these conferences in the later waves. A lot of very academic topics that are kind of very, a lot of math and debatable applicability.
It's time for a closing statement.
Oh yeah, time for a closing statement. Yeah, that's like in an American television presidential debate where they're 30 seconds long and just have a lot of boring words about freedom. But yeah, I don't think I have a closing statement. I'd rather answer more questions.
I quite liked a description of Lisbon as lightning in a bottle. I thought that was great.
Lightning in a bottle. Yeah, it's a pun. It's a pun on the phrase and Lightning Network.
So how do you see the deployment of these technologies, not just within your project, but generally, and also like in the coming few years?
Yeah, this project it's so bizarre and experimental that it has to be a sidechain or an altcoin if it can't be a sidechain, because it's just so weird. There's no possible way that you could get people to buy into it, and it's kind of it's like so. But yeah, as I explained, you'd start it off as something experimental, and people would try it out. It'd be a little bit like Lightning Network, and people could try out a little bit of it at a time, and then they could figure out what about it they like and what about it they don't like, and how to make it better, and then how to kind of scale it up and do all those other things. So I have a lot of plans for all of those, but I think you just get people involved, and then you do have this stuff about like you try to get something where it's like, how can you get one thing I would do is assemble a giant website with all of the entire track record of prediction markets, and I would try to compare it to other people to try and demonstrate how superior it is. And I need something to crack that statistical ignorance that pervades the population, where the prediction market says that something has a 10% chance, and then 1 out of every times you hear from your friends an email that the prediction market said that thing wouldn't happen, but it happened. Prediction markets are wrong, and I don't know what to do about that. You get those people too, the people who are just numerophobes, they're just afraid of numbers and afraid of measurement. And
we still have
that's depressing.
One more talk list, so she'll have some time for that.
Yeah.
All right, everyone give Paul a grand applause here.